everyone. I'm Dave March, the Spy Guy. This is my other channel that I sometimes do stuff for. And I brought on a friend of mine, Mark Lardas, who's also a historian and a writer and has published a lot more than me, to talk about some of the stuff that seems to be going on right now and compare it to stuff in the past that happened. So you're just telling me about Missouri Compromise and the Nebraska.
Right. The thing is that one thing we're hearing about right now is you've got a number of different people talking about secession and potential civil war. I'm not sure I'd go that far. I would say that you've got nearly half of the American population convinced that Biden is an illegitimate president. I suppose we can start singing a U.S. version of The Bastard King of England. And the worst thing about the Supreme Court refusing to hear the Texas case is that was kind of the final off-ramp for establishing legitimacy on Biden's election, because I suspect even if the court had ruled that the state legislatures would pick the electors, they would have just seated the Biden electors anyway. And at that point, you do have an argument that Biden's election has some legitimacy because it went through the legislatures. But in this case, you've got an awful lot of people convinced that Biden's president only through gross cheating in 4 counties in the United States. And I suspect that what we saw during the Trump administration by the resistance is going to pale to what we see going forward. We'll see. But
yeah, I agree. I think it's people wanted a fair hearing and they thought they could get one at the Supreme Court, and they're not getting it. And so now they're going to do other things. And unlike the last time when it was like official Washington was the resistance, I think this is going to be ordinary American citizens resisting in ways that will be very difficult for official Washington.
Yes. And one thing that strikes me is that Blue America is highly centralized and completely dependent upon Red America for its food, fuel, water, and pretty much everything else. You don't see major manufacturing done in large cities. You don't see, obviously, farming or mining or logging in big cities. You don't see that production, those goods being turned into useful goods in large cities. I think a lot of these people think that meat comes from the grocery store and that anything you want delivered to your house comes from Amazon or other such services, but they're not actually manufactured in a factory somewhere and don't have to travel to the big cities.
Yeah.
I might be wrong on that, but...
Well, I think there are still factories going on in the suburbia, but yeah, definitely the factories of being the center of places like Pittsburgh, and the steel foundries and all that stuff of all that's left, right? So.
Right, and in fact, what's interesting is except for ports like Houston, the traditional port in the downtown of the city has pretty much vanished because of the container revolution. New York City is not really a port anymore. It's all moved. New Orleans, the port that people go to nowadays is the port of, I think it's called the lower Mississippi River,
Mm.
which is between Baton Rouge and New Orleans.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got similar things on the West Coast, but certainly on the East Coast, most of the major port cities have turned their harbor areas into tourist areas.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, when I was in Boston last year, it still has significant traffic going through it.
Right.
So there's a few places like that, but yeah.
They've got, I think, an LNG port there, and that would be very hard to move.
Yeah.
However, the new LNG port that was built in the Texas, Louisiana area was placed outside the major cities.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking it's in Orange or the Beaumont area or somewhere in western Louisiana on the coast.
Mm.
But the point is that you really do have two Americas developing, one that's producing and one that's consuming. And the consumers outnumber the producers now, and therefore they're beginning to insist that the world conform to their wishes. The problem with that is you can't force the producers to produce unless you're willing to reimpose some form of slavery.
Yeah.
Now, that's been the Democrat platform since it was organized, but the problem is that the part of the country that's best able to resist forcing them to work are the rural districts and the small cities and the towns where most of the manufacturing is now going on. And certainly all the agriculture, all of the resource extraction. So it's going to be, if everything did go pear-shaped, it's not going to be a civil war like the U.S. Civil War in the 1860s, because that was a sectional struggle.
Right.
It's going to be more like the Russian Civil War or the French Civil War, where the two sides had coexisted with each other up until things became violent.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are concentrations. Obviously, places like California, you've got more of the progressives, and in Texas, you've got more conservatives, but you've got a very liberal population in the major Texas cities, particularly Austin.
Right.
The point is, there won't be the type of fronts that we had during the American Civil War.
Right.
And actually, even in that, there was considerable resistance to the Confederacy within the Confederacy. Virtually every state managed to raise at least one U.S. regiment of troops. Texas had three, one infantry and two cavalry regiments made up of Texas citizens that chose to remain loyal to the United States. And Tennessee, of course, had a civil war within a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
Eastern half of the state tried to remain loyal to the United States to be put down by the western half of the state. So,
isn't that how we get West Virginia?
West Virginia is kind of a special case because it was different from the rest of Virginia in the same way that Eastern Tennessee was different from Western Tennessee. The difference between the two is that it was easy for the Union to reach West Virginia.
Yeah.
Through the Ohio River, plus the fact that Kentucky stayed loyal to the United States. something that happened only after the Confederacy invaded it.
Yeah.
It was neutral up until then, with the governor wanting to join the Confederacy and the legislature wanting to remain in the Union. But the invasion ended up pushing Kentucky into the side of the Union. So now there are ways that you can get men and supplies to the West Virginia areas. And of course, what's interesting in West Virginia is you had Robert E. Lee leading the attempt to subdue West Virginia and bring it back into the Confederacy. He apparently did a miserable job because Rosecrans was the one that defeated him, although McClellan got most of the credit for it. So if you're not as good as Rosecrans, you're not as good a general as your reputation would indicate later. So
there we go. Yeah, well, it does seem to be my big worry is a Yugoslavia breakup where everything goes there. The good news, I don't think there's any of these great resentments in America like you have in the Balkan countries, where people are pissed off about stuff that happened 1,000 years ago, and they're still holding a grudge.
But the thing I worry about is that resentment can build up very, very quickly. So if you ended up getting the Democrats actually attempting to confiscate firearms in the United States, you could get Bosnian-style resistance or resentment in a very short period of time.
Yeah. I think I really don't think Democrats have really, or even most people have any idea how heavily armed some of the United States is. I remember a friend of mine going down to a funeral a few years ago, and he ended up talking to this guy, and he had like 100 guns and 250,000 rounds of ammunition, and he was a hobbyist. And my friend was like, how many other guys like you in the state do you think there would be? And it was Ohio. And the guy's like, oh, I don't know, a couple hundred people. And he's like, my friend was like, well, I don't think the zombies have any chance in this country.
It's more than a couple hundred people like that in Texas.
Yeah.
One thing I did enjoy when I was in Palestine was there were a bunch of folks there that were real small arms buffs. And they would take me out shooting from time to time. And it was always fascinating. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping that Biden, now that he has gotten what he wanted, is just content to maintain the status quo on the grounds that he can make more money that way than pushing a progressive agenda.
Oh yeah. He's doing the 2000, his foreign policy scheme. I've been looking at it. It's all the same guys, or the natural disposable people from Raytheon coming in to take over the Defense Department and all these other guys. So it's like, as long as Biden's in charge, I think we're okay. He just wants to return to normalcy. But Kamala is just, every indication she's just this kind of dumb woman who will do really crazy things if she thinks she needs to do so. I can see her doing that kind of agenda. But like Biden's not going to pack the Supreme Court, especially after what just happened.
I don't think he'll be able to pack the Supreme Court, basically because of Joe Manchin. And the probability, despite what people are saying, that at least one of the two Republicans are going to win the Senate elections in Georgia.
I think it looks like Loeffler. I think Loeffler is going to be the one. Originally, I thought Perdue would be because he's got that whole machine, but people are pissed, really angry in that state at his machine, and they really botched it. So I think I think you will have split tickets with Republicans saying, sure, we're going to keep the Senate. We'll elect Loeffler, but this Sonny Perdue guy's got to go. I think I think that will happen.
I don't know if that will happen. I am pretty sure that next time you won't get the poll watchers and the vote counting places leaving unless they are physically arrested.
Yeah. I think that's a sign of things to come. Like, and they'll have meaningful watch on things. It's not going to be guys cordoning off 15 feet away, like we saw in that video. Like, they are going to be
right.
They've recruited like 4,000 people for the recount, I hear. And yeah, so there will be safe, secure elections again in Georgia for this.
Right. I think what happened in November is a one-time affair. They might be able to pull it off again in 4 years, maybe. But that's a big maybe, because the reason they got away with it this time is nobody was expecting this level of cheating.
Yeah.
And you know, I worked as a election judge for nearly 10 years. And basically everything that I've seen in Michigan, well, Detroit, Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh,
Philadelphia,
Atlanta, and Milwaukee is behavior consistent with people conducting election fraud.
Right.
A lot of behavior can only be explained through an attempt to cheat.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't prove it because you can't get the evidence, but the behavior is indicative. And you know, I guess part of it is just because you can't prove somebody's a thief doesn't mean the person isn't a thief.
Oh yeah.
So, and I also think that if the media and tech attempts to censor people from saying this, they're just putting a lid on the pressure cooker.
Well, they're also just reinforcing people to believe there's something going on wrong.
Right.
If you don't think you want to have transparent stuff, you just say, oh yeah, no, of course this election is fine. But every time they say this thing's disputed or this thing, we are going to take down your video, they're just making people go, oh, you must have something to hide.
Well, they took down Scott Adams today, apparently. Or
yesterday. Oh, really?
Yes. So,
well, this video is going on Rumble as well as YouTube when it's done. So,
yeah. Well, a lot of the behavior of tech is reminding me of a sweatshirt that I'm seeing advertised that reads, "Underestimate me, that'll be fun."
Yeah.
I think they're underestimating the anger of the American public.
Oh yeah.
And certainly a large percentage of the country.
Yeah.
But again, that's not surprising because, you know, big tech and media are all in the blue enclaves.
Yeah.
And they have no contact with those that are in the red areas of the country.
Yeah.
And they were posturing for the last 4 years, and they think that the Trump supporters are posturing. And I don't think so, not from what I've heard in the neighborhood in Texas that I live. People are very angry. I sent you a link to an article that's close to the gates of Vienna. And that talked about how we're not seeing the anger of people that lost an election. We're seeing the anger of people who believe they were wrong.
Yes.
I don't care if, well, I care, but I'm not going to resent it if I support a candidate and an honest election is held and my candidate loses, even if the other candidate is a real nut job. However, if you think that you did win, and particularly with the stories about Dominion software randomly changing votes in favor of Biden from Trump, and whether or not those stories are true doesn't matter so much as the fact that you've got people believing them every time the media and tech tries to squelch discussion of that. That just reinforces the belief that it was crooked.
Yeah, and especially after we watched them for the last 4 years do all sorts of crazy things over Russiagate.
Right.
And try to sell that one down our throats. And when it came down to the wire, we found out it was all bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fascinating thing, I think I mentioned this the last time we talked, is that the progressives really remind me of the society they want. Really reminds me of feudalism, where you have a number of overlords telling everyone else how to run their lives. It's not an efficient system because, pretty much as Adam Smith said, the people that are actually producing things are the ones that know the business best and know how to innovate. But if your idea is control, you're willing to sacrifice the extra productivity for the control. And you can do that for years and years. Certainly that's what happened in the Soviet Union. Of course, the problem is that if the rest of the world starts moving beyond you, eventually such a technological divide occurs that you end up being outclassed. And a large reason that the Soviet Union fell was simply because communications technology had advanced to the point where they could not control the flow of information.
Right.
In the 50s, if you wanted to read a forbidden novel, you had to type a copy of it to pass it on to a friend. By the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, you could literally Xerox the thing or fax it. And, when the Soviet attempted their coup against Gorbachev, they took over the radio stations and television stations, but information ended up getting passed around via fax machine and phone, and they couldn't control the flow of information.
Yeah.
So you're still seeing that, even though you've got gatekeepers like Google and Facebook. There are enough places on the internet that you can pass information. Of course, that's part of the reason why I think you're going to see a trend towards forcing people to use sources like Facebook and the other big tech.
Well,
don't know
who will be forcing us to do that?
I'm sorry, did you say that again?
Who will be forcing us to do that? The government will force us to watch Facebook? Is that what you're trying to suggest?
No, I'm saying that they will end up shutting down other sources. You're already seeing some of that, where web providers are deplatforming and removing sites that don't conform to the revealed wisdom of our betters.
Yeah, but we're also getting new sites coming up to replace them. That's the thing. They're doing like you say, they're doing that, and then a new site comes along. I mean, they can't control sites in Russia. We could make a server farm there or something and run it there.
Right. Of course, they could do what the Chinese did and establish the Great Firewall of the United States instead of the Great Firewall of China.
Mhm.
Um, it would be interesting to see them try that, and it would. I don't think. I don't think they could do it based on the U.S. Constitution, but that seems to be a dead letter in many ways,
Mhm.
uh, more and more recently.
Mhm.
So it's like Glenn Reynolds said, when people abandoned blogs for curated sites like Facebook, uh, Twitter, and so forth, they lost a lot of their freedom. Now,
Mhm.
I'll admit, I'm not on most social media. The only social media I'm on is LinkedIn, and that's because I use that for hunting jobs.
Mhm.
And I do not put stuff other than business related information on there. I don't put my hobbies on there. I don't put pictures of my family,
Mhm.
and I don't comment on politics on LinkedIn
Right.
um, because I'm looking for work there, and
Yeah.
politics are irrelevant. The other thing that most people are ignoring is that what was acceptable 1 year can very quickly turn to be completely unacceptable within a few years.
Mhm.
I don't doubt that many of the positions that hyper woke are insisting people take will be cause for condemnation and canceling in 5 years.
Mhm.
And, you can say, but that's what you folks wanted me to say 5 years ago. And they'll insist, no, they didn't, and what you're doing is just quite wrong.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the thing about when you cancel someone, you want to create more people who are going to think like we do.
yeah,
You run out of people to cancel at one point.
yeah, but I guess that never stopped the Soviets. Of course, the Soviets had the advantage that when they canceled you, it was in a pine box 6 feet down.
Hmm.
Um, cancel culture can't do that yet.
Yet, though AOC wants prescriptions. I was like, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're seeing. I think in my. I spent a lot of time listening to the Revolutions podcast and doing some recent history studies on that. The inevitable thing is law and order kind of reactionary conservatism usually comes down and wins most of these things. The left
Yep.
always overreaches and then they get smacked down hard like the Paris Commune.
Well,
So,
the thing is, I see more parallels with the last 50 years of the Roman Republic than I do with the Civil War era.
yeah.
We haven't gotten to the point where Milo kills uh, Claudius yet, but I think we're pretty close. And for those listeners that don't know what I'm talking about, Milo and Claudius were two prominent Roman politicians that ran across each other on a road. One of them was leaving Rome, the other one was going to Rome. They had their retinues with them. And they ended up in a brawl where Milo ends up ordering um, his guardsmen to kill uh, Claudius, and then was able to escape punishment for having done so.
Mm-hmm.
I think he ended up exiled for reasons other than that.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't gotten to the point where the Gracchi brothers have ended up getting killed, or you actually have physical violence. The problem
Well, we
is,
have had some places yet, but not amongst the politicians quite yet. We've had
yeah,
the Republican Congress
Yeah.
Even getting shot by crazy people. We got that person who just shot a Trump supporter, though that guy in Portland, we found out was very mentally disturbed. So,
right. Well, and the guy that ended up shooting up the Republicans at the baseball game practice.
yeah.
But we haven't gotten to deliberate violence organized by parties, I guess is what I'm saying. You haven't got people throwing stones at a couple of the major elected politicians that are hiding in the Curia, as happened with the Gracchi brothers. They played for keeps in Rome.
Yeah.
You don't see that here, even after the American Civil War. The Grant and Lincoln maneuvered things so that they couldn't try any of the Confederate leaders for treason. And that outraged a lot of people, but it proved to be a wise move because it killed any continuing guerrilla warfare.
Right.
Grant, when he signed the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia, had a clause in there that the soldiers were to go home unmolested by the federal government unless they violated the law in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a whole lot easier to take to the hills and die fighting when you don't have a choice. But when you're being told, hey, you can go home and we're going to leave you alone, it makes it a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one reason you did not see widespread guerrilla warfare in the United States following the end of the Civil War, except in the Indian territories and in the West, north of that, Kansas. But you'd have a lot of guerrilla warfare there during the Civil War.
Yeah, bleeding Kansas.
Yeah,
is it now bleeding Portland?
Yeah, well, you really haven't seen the same type of bleeding in Portland as you did in Kansas prior that, and that was prior to the Civil War.
Right.
But even during the Civil War, you had Confederate guerrillas going through pro-Union towns in Kansas and burning them out.
Yeah.
In the Indian territories, you had 5 semi-autonomous nations. They had their own legislatures. They were sovereign, except that they admitted allegiance to the United States. But each one of 3 of the tribes were divided between pro-Union and pro-Confederate factions, and they ended up having a civil war within a civil war in what's now Oklahoma. And that was exacerbated by the Indian laws that included the fact that you could not own the land, but you owned the buildings and improvements on the land and control them. So when the Confederate Indians took over a part of the state, their nation that was occupied by Union sympathizers, they burned down all the buildings. And when the Union Indians reclaimed that territory and moved further south, they burned down all the Confederate Indian buildings. And it ended up in a very nasty civil war that lasted for years after the end of the American Civil War. So that's what you could see, if things go south here.
Yeah. So, I don't think things are going to go south right away, like I've said.
No.
But I do think the 2022 elections are going to be crazy, because I think we're going to see in certain areas basically militia or organized groups of reactionary militia going into Detroit and going into those poll stations as poll watchers. and other places in these big cities.
I don't know if you'll see that in 2022, because except for the statewide races, vote fraud from those areas won't much matter. The individual congressional districts are much more decentralized.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just saying, I don't think these guys are going to go. These guys are now convinced that something has happened, and they're going to go in to protect it. And it's not from a this makes any kind of sense kind of way, in a sense that, but just in their reactionaries, and they're reacting to what happened. And now you're going to have a bunch of like Proud Boys show up in Detroit to register as poll workers. And the BLM activists that we learned were signed up as poll watchers. And then the BLM poll workers are going to clash with them.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We had the Battle of Athens in Tennessee after World War II, where pretty much that type of thing happened in a rural county in Tennessee, where the local residents decided they'd had enough of the local political machine and actually stood guard over the polling places with firearms.
Yeah, I think that if that does happen, that'll be more Philadelphia than Detroit.
Right. So, we'll see. I think you're more likely to see what you're talking about in 2024 than in 2022. Let's face it.
Yeah, so armed militia, probably 2024. But organized groups of Proud Boys, 2022. Because it'll be the first election they could do it.
Right. Well, the other thing to remember is that we reapportion the congressional districts in 2021 due to the 2020 census, and that most of the state legislatures, especially in the states that are gaining seats, are controlled by the Republicans.
Oh yeah, I fully understand that. Congress is going back to being Republican in 2022.
Right.
So.
Right. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens in places like California, where the misgovernment is getting to be so bad.
Oh yeah, there's a recall for Newsom. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen.
Yeah. And the thing is that if what I'm wondering is, people are saying, well, what's going to happen is they'll prosecute the conservatives that use violence, but they won't prosecute the Antifa types that use violence. But there's an equal protection clause in the United States Constitution. So if they do that, it's going to become very difficult to actually prosecute one side but not the other.
Right.
Because at some point, some judge is going to rule, yes, these people are correct. You're not prosecuting the other side, therefore you can't prosecute them.
Yeah, I think a lot of sanity to the judicial system will come back as soon as Trump's out of office. So all these law and order guys will be much more willing to stick up because they just don't want him.
Yeah, well, I think Trump was very popular among the blue-collar portion of the population. He was very unpopular with those that, I guess, just worked with ideas, would be the best way to put it.
Intelligentsia.
If you look at the strong Republican anti-Trumpers, most of them were Beltway types.
Yep.
Certainly that's the story behind the Lincoln Project. I don't know that any of them I think some of them may be Army veterans or military veterans, but I don't know if they've done honest work since then.
Yep.
Uh,
Look, it was just the neocons. They went home. They came home. They went to they were on the left. They left because of Carter. They went to join up with Reagan, and now they're going home because the Republican Party is returning to being the anti-war party.
But the thing is that one of the things that I'm seeing is there, historically in the United States, they've always championed the producers. And now you're seeing the producers being, to some extent, demonized. The idea that you're extracting oil from the ground means you're evil,
right?
Even though that the energy from that oil allows the poor to live at levels that were undreamed of by kings in the 13th century.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the people that you're seeing lauded, particularly by the media, are the community organizers, the rent seekers, the ones that charge a toll to get things done.
Right.
And they're a lot more like the medieval robber barons than the manufacturers of the 19th century that were called robber barons.
Yeah.
Because they at least produced something.
What was it, the Kriegsritter or something like that?
Hmm?
The German term was like Kriegsritter or something like that? Corrupt knights or something?
Ritter is knight, but you had feudal lords that would build castles on the Rhine River, which was the main artery for commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And they would charge a toll of every barge that went through there. And of course, if you have to go past 10 castles in order to get to your destination, and each one of them wants 10% of your cargo for the privilege of passing. By the time you get to where you're unloading the cargo, you don't have anything.
Right.
So why bother?
Mm-hmm.
You're beginning to see that same type of thing in the United States, particularly in the big cities.
Right.
So, which is one reason manufacturing is abandoning the big cities. There are some legacy factories still there, but where are the automobiles, new automobile plants going up? They're going up in rural Alabama. There's one in Lafayette, Indiana, for example, which is
the biggest Toyota factory. I used to work for Toyota as a subcontractor for 2 years. The biggest Toyota factory in the world is in Texas.
Yeah, but where in Texas? It's not in downtown Dallas or downtown.
No, I can't remember.
It might have been in Arlington.
No, I don't think it was in Arlington. But it's in the kind of a obscure. I can't remember the name of it.
Right. That's where the steel mills are in Texas, for example. You've got steel mills in Lone Star, Texas, Jewett, and I think in Grapeland. These are towns with 5,000 to 15,000 people in. Mm-hmm. So you don't have Gary, Indiana anymore. You don't have United Steel in downtown Baltimore or the steel mills in Pittsburgh. So
some of it's in San Antonio.
Okay.
But yeah. Well, so so where all the stuff is. So that's the thing. Like I remember someone saying we should get rid of a friend of mine who kicked me off her Facebook, and I'm hardly even using Facebook. And she's like, everything good is in the blue states, and we can get. This was back in 2012, and I was like, you don't have a clue where everything is, clearly.
Yeah, well, even California, which is considered the bluest of the blue states, once you get more than 50 miles inland, it's pretty much solid blue. solid red.
Red, yeah.
And that's once you get away from Southeast New York and Albany, it's solid red.
Mm-hmm. I've been through those places.
And I was talking to someone in Illinois, and they were saying that everything outside of Chicago is red. So,
oh yeah, I have a friend of mine who is one of the biggest people in the world. When Trump was elected in 2016, I emailed him immediately. So what did you think? He's like, this is amazing. I remember actually being in Ohio with that guy in 2016, and all my friends were. There's one guy who's a solid Democrat, but the rest of them were. Who was the governor at the time? But he was in Congress. But they were all Republicans like him, like very moderate. He was the guy who went all the way to the end with Trump, and who's now endorsed Biden. Anyways, and I turned to this guy and I said, so you must be very happy. And he's like, what do you mean? Because the convention had just happened. And I said, Trump's going to win this year. And he's like, Dave, you're the first serious person I've met who's ever told me that. I'm like, you have no idea what's coming. But I had
didn't either, did you?
Sorry?
So, I don't know. It's as I said, it's going to be an interesting 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing about the Trump administration is that what the Democrats did to Trump has hamstrung the ability of the president to rule by executive order.
Mm-hmm.
Because the courts constantly overturned Trump's executive orders on the grounds that he had to maintain the previous president's executive orders.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that Biden is not going to do what Trump was able to do, which is get Congress to cancel the executive orders written in the last 90 days of the president's term.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need both houses of Congress to agree to vacate those executive orders.
Ah, interesting.
And Trump used that a lot in the first 3 to 6 months of his administration to get rid of a lot of the executive orders that Obama had put in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Biden's going to be able to do that.
Interesting. I didn't even realize that was a thing. Oh yeah. So I'm going to go. Even though I know there's going to be things coming down the pike that are going to shock us in the next month or so, I'm going to go with the idea that Biden gets sworn in. What do we think the president's going to do next?
Which president? Trump?
Trump. What will he do once he's out
of
office?
He'll continue fighting, but if the electors return Biden, he'll leave.
Oh yeah, well I know that. I mean, like, what's he going to do in his people think he's going to start his own news network. I'm not too sure about that. I think maybe his son Donald will start or work together with something like Right Side Broadcast Network to try and make it a bit bigger. I know Trump is going to hold rallies every month.
Right.
Until Biden's out of office.
I don't know if he'll run for president in 2024, but the media is going to be stuck with him. The best thing that could happen to him would be if New York was stupid enough to actually file criminal charges against him.
Yeah.
For one thing, he has enough money that he can fight that for 4 years. And the longer that fight goes on, the more third world it's going to appear.
Yep.
Especially considering the behavior of the Biden family. I mean, I never thought you'd get a family that would make the Clintons look relatively honest by comparison.
Right? Holy crap. We were just discovering. I always thought Joe was just in the like, you know, every senator gets some sort of industry is tied to their state. Marco Rubio is a great guy on everything except sugar, because in order to be great on everything, he had to sell out to one industry. And I always thought Biden was the same way. He was from Delaware, so he sold out to the credit card industry to be that. But no, he's got his hands in everything. Oh my God.
I'm amazed. I do have to admire his industry on one level, but it's still horrifying on others. So
yeah. It's a weird, interesting time that we're going to be watching in the next 4 years, as you say. Yeah, I think Trump might think he's going to set up for a next run, but he's also in his 70s,
right.
and he'll be 4 years older then. And he'll just, I know he and Bernie had a lot of energy, but geez, I don't know. And I also think there are more capable players to be messengers for Trumpism or his movement than he is. That's his other problem.
Right. But I'm not sure that Trump will run, but I am sure that he'll remain politically active. He's had way too much fun to walk away from this. And if you look at him, he's really having fun with all of this. That's something people miss, especially his opponents, is that for him, this is an awful lot of fun. And what else does he have to do at this stage in his life? There's only so much the extra money will bring you.
It's true.
And Trump has more than enough to keep him happy the rest of his life. But he's your typical brawling New Yorker. And he enjoys a good fight. And the Democrats are giving him what he wants, which is a fight. That's part of the reason I'm saying that if the state of New York is foolish enough to prosecute him, it's going to end up backfiring on them. And, it's going to be, Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner yet again, just like it was for the 4 years of the Trump administration. Trump even has red hair. Orange hair.
So it's going to be like the John Gotti trials and the Teflon Don level stuff if they go after him in that way. What else is there? I think Pennsylvania is going to send its own set of legislators. The governor says he won't hold a special session. I think these guys are so pissed off. I watched Mastriano in an interview, and he said, yeah, we're getting told to go in and just sit in the legislature without the permission of the governor and send their own electors. I'm like, okay, I guess that's going to happen.
We'll see. It would be interesting if that did happen. Boy, would that be interesting.
I think this guy Mastriano is the real deal. He's like, I think he might be president in 4 years' time. He's you should definitely watch interviews with him. There's one with Dr. Steve Turley. That's the one I was watching. Just sitting down. He's an ex-Army colonel, general staff officer, and he's not used to things going wrong. He's going to be the next governor of Pennsylvania, probably. And that one I think is going to happen. And if he does it, if they do it in Pennsylvania, are other states going to do it as well? I don't know. Arizona starting to look like they might do something like that, especially after the state party got shut down in that election case. But after they did 2,500 ballots, and they found anywhere, the Republicans said 6% failure rate, and the Democrats said it was 11% error rate. It's like on mail-in batches. It's like, holy crap.
This is what people seem to be missing. Is there's a lot of anger out there, and everyone thinks that it's just going to go away. I don't think so. I think they've stoked the boiler for 4 years. They've changed the rules. And now they're going to learn that when you do that, you can't put things back in the, you can't put toothpaste back in the tube again.
Yeah, right. That's pretty much it. Mm-hmm.
So we'll see, and I'm sure it will be roundly condemned by all of the en passants in the media.
Mm-hmm.
But it will be cheered by a large portion of the electorate, not necessarily the majority of it, but certainly a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, as my oldest son is telling me, we're now living in a Chinese curse.
Yes, we have been. I made a speculation a few days ago on this channel that I'm on, that we are watching an Arab Spring moment where the institutions in the United States are just going to be hammered repeatedly so fast and so hard, we won't know once we're on the other side what we're going to look like. And I think that's it. We're watching like the fall of the Berlin Wall or the Arab Spring and happening in the United States. That's the big difference. Instead of it happening over there, it's happening here.
It will be interesting. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily pleasant, but definitely interesting.
Mm-hmm. So, well, we've been talking an hour, and we never even got to the source of our original discussion.
Yeah.
But I have to get going for another thing later. But did you enjoy this? You want to do this again?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll probably do this one, another video after Christmas. How's that sound?
That sounds good. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Quite literally, I'll be stuck at home for a good long time.
Okay. So, well, it's been great, and I'm just going to say, hey guys, this is the Spy Guy, Dave and March. Like, share, subscribe if you like this kind of material. Bye-bye.